The dust hung thick in the air of the Redstone County Auction Barn. The scent of hay, sweat, and worn leather lingered like memory itself. Voices echoed, boots stomped, and hats bobbed in every direction. But inside the ring, all that faded away. At the center stood Boaz Redwillow, tall, rigid, and worn by life, gripping the lead rope of a dark stallion whose presence silenced even the loudest bidder. His name was Gravetide, and his coat gleamed like midnight under the flickering lights. Boaz kept his jaw clenched. He'd promised himself he wouldn't look Gravetide in the eye, not after what this sale meant. He was dressed better than usual, clean blazer, polished belt buckle, but his heart hadn't dressed for the occasion. The auctioneer's voice rattled the wooden rafters. The crowd leaned in. One more raise. One final bid. Then, sold. The gavel dropped like a tombstone. Gravetide shifted, muscles tense. His hooves danced across the dirt, not in fear, but in resistance. Across the pen, Colt Brenner, the new buyer from Amarillo, stepped forward. Confident, wealthy, smiling like he'd just won a trophy. He reached for the reins. But Gravetide turned sharply, nostrils flared, head high. The stallion refused to budge. The murmurs grew. Boaz tugged the rope gently, whispering under his breath, "Come on, boy. Don't do this now." But Gravetide wasn't listening. His eyes locked onto Boaz, not with panic, but with something else. Something deeper. A pleading. As if he could sense this wasn't just a sale. It was abandonment. Boaz's hand trembled. Just a year ago, his wife Delaney Frost had died, and the only thing that got him out of bed in the mornings was walking this horse through the pasture. Selling Gravetide wasn't just financial survival, it was his final surrender. And now, in front of 200 strangers, Gravetide was refusing to leave him. Then it happened. The horse let out a deep, guttural snort, then stomped hard. The rope went taut. The ring grew silent. And as Boaz tried to calm him, something unexpected broke through his voice, a crack. Not in volume. In emotion. "Please, don't make this harder," he muttered. Colt Brenner raised a brow, clearly annoyed. The crowd began shifting, whispers turning to stares. And at the edge of the crowd, someone else was watching. A woman with silver-blonde hair and tears in her eyes. Savannah Ridgeley. Boaz didn't know she was there. Not yet. But her return was going to change everything. And that's when Gravetide did something no one expected. Gravetide took a slow, deliberate step, not toward the buyer, Colt Brenner, but straight back to Boaz Redwillow. The stallion's head lowered slightly as if offering his heart rather than his body. His flanks trembled, not from fear, but from some invisible weight he couldn't carry alone. Boaz stood frozen, rope slack in his hand, breath caught in his chest. It wasn't defiance. It was loyalty. Pure, raw, and visible to every soul in that barn. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Colt stepped back, his smirk fading fast. "What the hell kind of trick is this?" he snapped. Boaz didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes were locked on Gravetide's, dark, wide, filled with a sorrow Boaz hadn't seen since Delaney's funeral. This wasn't just about a horse refusing to be led away. This was a final stand for something bigger. Something sacred. The kind of connection you only get once in a lifetime, if you're lucky. Up in the stands, Savannah Ridgeley watched with her hands clasped tight in her lap. She hadn't been back to Redstone in over a decade, not since her sister Delaney married Boaz. She hadn't planned on showing her face today either, until she heard Gravetide was being auctioned. Savannah knew things about that horse no one else did. About the night Delaney first rode him. About the promise Boaz made by that fence post the morning she died. The auctioneer shifted nervously on the platform. "Let's, give the buyer a moment with the animal," he said, trying to recover the moment. But Colt Brenner wasn't interested in coaxing. "Forget it," he said sharply, dusting off his jacket. "Keep the damn horse. I don't buy animals with broken spirits." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Colt turned and walked off, and just like that, the deal was dead. Boaz still hadn't moved. The cheers that erupted from the crowd didn't even register in his ears. He stared down at the rope in his hand, the same one Delaney had braided herself when Gravetide was a foal. Slowly, without thinking, Boaz dropped it. Gravetide didn't flinch. He didn't run. He just stood beside Boaz, calm now, breathing deep like he knew he'd won. In the quiet that followed, a soft voice broke through from the aisle. "He never would have left her either." Boaz turned toward the sound. It was Savannah, her eyes full of memory. "That horse still remembers," she said. "And so do you." Her words hit harder than she meant them to, or maybe exactly how she meant. Because what Gravetide refused to forget was something Boaz had been trying to bury for years. And the deeper reason for that had nothing to do with loyalty, and everything to do with Delaney's final night. The air outside the barn had turned thick and gray. Thunder grumbled in the distance as if the sky itself remembered something painful. Boaz stood alone near the hitching post, one hand resting on Gravetide's neck, the other holding the same rope he had tried to let go of. He could still feel Savannah's words echoing through him. That horse still remembers. He hadn't planned on seeing her today, hadn't seen her since Delaney's funeral. And now, her voice dug up something he'd fought hard to forget. Savannah approached slowly, careful not to startle either of them. "I shouldn't have come," she said, folding her arms, her gaze avoiding his. "But I heard you were selling him. And I couldn't let that happen without saying something." Boaz didn't answer at first. He simply watched the horizon. The silence between them wasn't new. It was inherited. Years of distance, of unsaid things, settled between them like dust on old furniture. "You weren't there," Boaz finally said. His voice was low, broken around the edges. "The night she died, you didn't see what I saw." Savannah's face tensed. She wanted to argue, but something in his tone stopped her. Boaz turned toward her, and for the first time in years, his eyes looked straight into hers. Gravetide was the last thing she touched before she got in that truck. Savannah took a step closer. "She left something for you, Boaz. A letter. You never got it, because I was too angry, too bitter after the funeral." She pulled a worn envelope from her jacket. It was yellowed, soft at the edges, with Boaz's name written in Delaney's careful, looping handwriting. His breath caught. The envelope trembled in his hands as if it burned. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he looked at Gravetide, the only witness to that last morning. The horse leaned into him, as if sensing the weight in his chest. The sound of rain beginning to fall on the tin roof filled the silence, steady and heavy, like the grief he had never finished feeling. Slowly, Boaz slipped the letter into his pocket. "Not here. Not now." Savannah looked down, then back at him. "You weren't the only one who lost her that night." Boaz nodded slightly. "I know." Then, as the rain intensified and the barn grew dimmer, Gravetide took a single step forward, not toward the exit, but toward the shadows behind the arena. Something had caught his attention. Something just beyond the edge of the known. And that was when Boaz saw the man he thought he'd never face again. Griffin Callahan. Griffin Callahan stood near the barn doors, shadowed by the rain and dim lantern light. His presence wasn't loud, but it struck like lightning through Boaz's chest. Tall, lean, with gray at his temples and the same calculating stare he'd had 20 years ago. He hadn't changed much, except for the lines that told of long nights and harder choices. Boaz felt Gravetide shift again, muscles tight, ears pinned. The stallion recognized him too. Savannah's eyes went wide. "What the hell is he doing here?" she whispered. Boaz didn't answer. He couldn't. The last time Griffin Callahan had stood within 100 yards of Boaz Redwillow was the night Delaney nearly left. The night Boaz thought his world had ended. Griffin wasn't just an old friend. He was the man Delaney once loved, before she chose Boaz. Before everything fell apart. Griffin stepped forward, slow and deliberate, boots kicking up wet dust. "Nice horse," he said calmly, like they were just two old ranchers at a county fair. Boaz didn't respond. His hands curled into fists. "Still loyal as ever," Griffin continued, nodding toward Gravetide. "Just like she was." The words landed heavy. There was venom in them, or maybe grief. Either way, Boaz felt the burn. "I thought you left for good," Boaz said finally, his voice like sandpaper. "You made your choice. She made hers." Griffin's jaw tightened. "I came back because there's something you need to know. About Delaney. About that night." Boaz's heart thudded. The barn, the rain, the crowd, all of it faded. Only Griffin remained, and the truth he claimed to carry. Savannah stepped between them. "Don't do this now," she warned, her voice sharp. "This isn't your moment, Griffin." But the man didn't back down. "You don't understand," he said. "That night wasn't what you think. She was never supposed to be alone on that road." Boaz felt the blood drain from his face. "You're lying." Griffin shook his head. "You know I'm not." Gravetide snorted loudly, stomping the ground as the tension rose. The storm outside cracked through the sky, thunder rolling across the hills. Boaz turned slowly, eyes burning into Griffin's. "If you have something to say, say it." Griffin reached into his coat and pulled out a worn photo of Delaney, holding Gravetide as a foal, standing between both men, smiling. But it wasn't the photo that froze Boaz in place. It was the date written on the back, and what it revealed about whose horse Gravetide truly was. Boaz stared at the photograph as if it had teeth. The ink on the back had faded, but one line was still clear: Gravetide, our beginning. December 14th, 2002, G and D. His breath caught in his throat. That was 3 months before Delaney ever told him she was pregnant, and 4 months before they married. Boaz had believed Gravetide was a gift, a wedding present from Delaney. But the date told a different story. The horse had come from them. Griffin and Delaney. Together. Savannah reached for the photo, but Boaz pulled it back, holding it like a wound. "You knew?" he asked her, voice cracked and low. She shook her head quickly. "Not the date. Not that. I swear." Griffin stood still, his expression softer now, almost regretful. "We broke things off not long after that picture," he said. "But Gravetide, he was born during that time. She kept him because he reminded her of freedom, of a life she almost had." Boaz's world tilted. All these years, he'd seen Gravetide as a symbol of his bond with Delaney, the silent guardian of their grief, their memories. But now, with this truth, it felt like the stallion had been carrying a secret on his back this whole time. The thought of Delaney raising that horse while still tangled in love with another man turned Boaz's stomach. "Why now?" he asked Griffin. "Why come back and tear this open?" "Because you need to stop burying her with guilt," Griffin said quietly. "She didn't choose you out of pity. She loved you, Boaz. But she kept this part hidden because she thought it would break you." Savannah stepped forward, her voice firmer now. "She was trying to protect both of you. And maybe she made the wrong call. But it was never about betrayal. It was about survival." Outside, the storm had passed, leaving only wet ground and silence in its wake. Gravetide stepped forward, his head brushing against Boaz's shoulder. The contact was grounding, painfully familiar. Boaz didn't pull away. Instead, he let the truth wash over him, like the rain on the barn roof minutes earlier. There were still questions, still cracks. But some part of him, maybe the same part Delaney had loved, began to understand. Then Griffin pulled something else from his coat, a small, leather-bound notebook. She wrote everything in here, from the day she found out about the baby, to the night she died. Boaz stared at the book like it might explode. She left it for you. I didn't read it. I couldn't. Griffin handed it to him. And as Boaz held that fragile book in his hands, a single sentence written inside would soon unravel everything he thought he knew about Gravetide, Delaney, and himself. The notebook felt heavier than it looked. Its leather cover was soft from wear, corners curled, the spine cracked just enough to show it had been opened often, though never by Boaz. His hands shook as he thumbed through the first few pages, the ink delicate and curling in that unmistakable handwriting. Delaney's voice was there, caught between the lines. And it didn't whisper, it pulled. Savannah stayed quiet nearby, her arms crossed tightly against her chest. Griffin had stepped outside, giving space Boaz didn't ask for, but clearly needed. Gravetide stood at his side, unmoving, like he somehow understood that this moment wasn't meant to be interrupted. Boaz sat on the edge of a hay bale and began to read, slowly, each word like a breath drawn from the grave. March 18th, I saw the heartbeat today. And all I could think was, how do I tell Boaz that I'm afraid? Not of the baby, but of what it means to love again after Griffin. Boaz's throat tightened. His eyes flicked to the next page. Boaz is good. Steady. I need steady. Griffin was fire. Boaz is home. That sentence hit harder than he expected. Not a betrayal. A confession. Delaney hadn't been hiding love. She'd been learning how to trust it again. Further in, the pages turned darker. The final entries from the week before her accident were scattered, emotional, full of urgency. Boaz still thinks I married him because I needed saving. But he's the one who saved me, and he doesn't even know it. His hands trembled. The words blurred from tears he didn't know he'd let fall. For all these years, he had punished himself in silence, convinced he'd been second place in her heart. But then came the sentence that shattered him. If anything ever happens to me, take care of Gravetide. He was the first creature to see me after I found peace. He knows me better than anyone, even Boaz. But Boaz, he's the only man I ever truly trusted to love me through the silence. That was it. The breath left his lungs. Not fire. Not steadiness. Trust. That had been the bridge between them all along. Boaz closed the notebook slowly, pressing it to his chest. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The air was still, almost reverent. He looked to Gravetide, who lowered his head again, eyes soft, ears turned toward him. You knew, Boaz whispered. You knew all along. The horse didn't move, didn't need to. But from the far end of the barn, a new voice echoed under the rafters, soft, broken, and trembling. Maisie Hawthorne, a name Boaz hadn't heard since the funeral, stepped into the light, and everything he thought was resolved suddenly wasn't. Boaz turned slowly, the notebook still pressed to his chest, as Maisie Hawthorne stepped into the barn's quiet gloom. Her face was thinner, her hair streaked with more silver than he remembered, but her eyes, sharp, intelligent, wounded, hadn't changed a bit. I shouldn't be here, she said gently, her boots brushing hay as she walked closer. But I couldn't stay away after I heard Griffin showed up. Boaz didn't answer right away. Gravetide snorted softly, as if sensing the shift in energy. Savannah took a cautious step back, watching Maisie with a mixture of confusion and concern. Boaz finally found his voice. It's been 15 years, Maisie. She nodded, her gaze falling briefly to the stallion, then to the leather-bound notebook in his hands. And I've carried something for every one of them, she said. Something Delaney asked me to keep, in case you ever found the truth. Boaz narrowed his eyes. Another secret? Maisie looked down, shame washing across her features. Not a secret. A choice. One I didn't agree with, but I promised her I'd honor it. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small, folded paper, yellowed and soft from years of being opened and read. It's not much. Just one sentence. But it's the sentence that kept me awake all these years. He unfolded the paper slowly. The handwriting was Delaney's again, unmistakable. It read, "If Boaz ever learns the truth, tell him I loved him exactly as he was, broken and all." Boaz stared at the words. They didn't shatter him. They stitched something back together. 4 years he'd tried to hide the fractures inside him. The guilt, the inadequacy, the belief that he was always Delaney's second choice. But now he knew she'd seen all of it, and loved him because of it, not despite it. Maisie stepped back, her expression softening. She was scared he'd never believe it coming from her, she said quietly. That's why she wrote it to me. Said I was the only one who knew how much you doubted yourself. Boaz lowered his head, tears trailing quietly down his cheeks. Gravetide leaned in once more, pressing against him like a steady heartbeat. Then Savannah's phone buzzed, a message that made her expression drop. She turned to Boaz. "It's Thorn," she said carefully. "He says someone just broke into the stables back at your ranch, and only one stall was forced open." Boaz didn't speak. He already knew. And so did Gravetide, who let out a sudden sharp cry that sent a chill through everyone present. Boaz didn't wait. As soon as Savannah read the message, he dropped the notebook into her hands and was already moving. Gravetide responded without hesitation, stepping in line behind him like a soldier following his commander. The barn doors banged open into the damp night, and the truck's headlights lit up the gravel. The storm had passed, but something darker had just begun. Savannah and Maisie climbed into her car to follow, while Boaz drove with both hands white-knuckled on the wheel. His mind raced. One stall open. Only one. He didn't need to ask which horse it was. Gravetide's stall. And only 2 people alive even knew how to work that old latch without making a sound, Boaz himself and Duke Ashwell. He hadn't heard that name in years, but it hit like a whip crack across his chest. Duke had worked for him once, years ago, back when Gravetide was just a foal. A talented trainer, full of charm and ambition, but something about him had always felt off. Then one night, without warning, Duke was gone. No goodbye. No explanation. Just a broken gate and rumors he'd tried to sell one of Boaz's colts under a fake name. Boaz had buried the memory, chalked it up to a mistake he'd never repeat. But now it seemed Duke had returned, and he'd come for the horse he'd once tried to steal. Gravetide paced in the trailer behind him, restless, hooves clacking against the floor with rising panic. He knew, somehow, that danger was close. Closer than it had been in years. When they reached the ranch, the front gate was wide open, swinging in the breeze. Thorn Calix stood near the barn with a shotgun resting against his leg and a look on his face that said you won't like what's inside. "They came in quiet," Thorn muttered as Boaz stepped out. "Cut the fence. Knew the cameras were down from the storm." Boaz moved past him, straight into the stable, heart pounding. Gravetide's stall door hung off one hinge, the lock cleanly clipped. Inside, a small silver object glinted in the sawdust, a horsehair bracelet. Delaney's. The one she used to wear tied around her wrist when she brushed Gravetide as a colt. Boaz picked it up slowly, his hands trembling. Then came the sound. A truck engine, in the distance, roaring away down the back road that led to the canyon pass. Gravetide let out a scream, wild, guttural, primal, and Boaz felt it in his spine. Because Duke hadn't just broken in. He was taking Gravetide home, to finish what he started all those years ago. The canyon pass twisted through the hills like a scar. Boaz knew every bend, every loose stone, every blind curve, and he drove as if haunted. The night pressed in around him, headlights cutting through fog rising off the wet earth. In the distance, brake lights flickered. The stolen truck was moving fast. Too fast. But Boaz wasn't about to let Duke Ashwell disappear again, not with Gravetide. Behind him, in the trailer, Gravetide kicked and cried out, wild with panic. Boaz gripped the wheel tighter. "Hold on, boy," he whispered. "I'm coming." The stallion had never made sounds like this before. They weren't just cries of fear. They were cries of memory, of betrayal. And somewhere deep in his instincts, Boaz felt it too. This wasn't just about getting the horse back. It was about facing the man who tried to erase everything Delaney left behind. As Boaz rounded the final curve, he saw the truck ahead had stopped, tires half off the edge of the canyon overlook, one brake light shattered. Duke stood beside it, trying to calm Gravetide, who thrashed against the ramp like a creature possessed. Boaz didn't wait. He slammed the truck into park and jumped out, shotgun in hand. "Step away from him!" he shouted, the sound echoing against the canyon walls. Duke turned, slow and calm, as if he'd been expecting this. "Took you long enough," he said. "You always did show up after the damage was done." Boaz's hands tensed. "You don't get to talk about damage. Not after what you pulled. Not after Delaney." At her name, Duke's smile faltered. "You think she was perfect?" he said bitterly. "She promised me that horse. Said it would be ours." Boaz felt his stomach twist. "You're lying." But Gravetide, still trapped, eyes wild, let out a scream that shattered the moment. Boaz stepped forward, ignoring the gun, ignoring Duke, his eyes only on the stallion. "I'm here, boy. I got you." Slowly, he climbed the ramp. The trailer door was half open. One wrong move and Gravetide could bolt or fall straight into the ravine. Boaz didn't blink. He dropped the gun. Behind him, Duke took a step forward. "He doesn't belong to you." Boaz looked over his shoulder. "He never did belong to anyone. But he chose me. Just like she did." In that moment, Gravetide stilled, completely. His eyes locked on Boaz's, and something between them snapped into place. Then Duke reached for the door, but a thunderous kick from Gravetide knocked it wide open, throwing Duke back. The stallion leapt from the trailer, not in fear, but straight toward Boaz. And in that instant, everything hung on whether Gravetide would run or trust. Gravetide landed with a thunder of hooves, his body colliding against Boaz's chest, not violently, but with trust. Boaz stumbled back, catching the stallion's weight like an embrace. The breath rushed from his lungs, not from the impact, but from the realization that Gravetide had made his choice. He hadn't run. He hadn't fought. He had come home, to Boaz. Duke scrambled to his feet, blood trickling from a cut above his brow. His face twisted in frustration, but he didn't move forward. Something in the way Gravetide stood, head high, chest out, legs planted between Duke and Boaz, warned him. The horse wasn't a possession. He was a protector, a witness, a memory given form. And he wasn't going anywhere. "I should have had both of you years ago," Duke spat. "Her. And the damn horse." Boaz took a slow step forward, voice steady. "And that's why she chose neither. You don't get love like this. You try to own it." Gravetide let out a deep, guttural snort, like punctuation to Boaz's words. Duke stared a moment longer, then turned and walked toward the edge of the overlook, his figure swallowed by the shadows. Boaz turned back to Gravetide and pressed his forehead against the stallion's. The fear, the guilt, the weight he'd carried for over a decade finally cracked, not with a scream, but with silence. A silence filled with understanding. Forgiveness. Delaney hadn't left him questions. She'd left him answers, in her words, in the horse, and in the life they built quietly and imperfectly. Later that morning, as the sun rose over Redstone County, Boaz stood with Savannah, Maisie, and Thorn on the ridge near the old pasture. Gravetide ran free again, mane slicing the wind, the same way Delaney once rode him when life felt full of promise. Boaz held the notebook to his chest, its pages no longer heavy, but holy. "I think she'd be proud," Savannah said quietly. "Of both of you." Boaz nodded. "Not just proud," he replied. "I think she was waiting for this moment all along. For me to see Gravetide not as what I lost, but as what she gave me to keep going." As the horse circled back toward the fence, Boaz whispered softly, just loud enough for himself to hear, "Goodbye, Delaney. I heard you this time." And in the distance, as Gravetide lifted his head to the wind, it was almost as if she answered back, in the rhythm of his gallop, and in the place he had never once tried to leave.